Hi everyone, my name is Alina and I'm Sustainability Manager at GS1 Germany. I am very pleased to tell you more about the GS1 guideline, Circular Plastics Traceability today. The guideline Circular Plastics Traceability was developed in a GS1 committee project in cooperation with industry partners and published in August 2023. This guideline aims to specify processes and attributes to enable data-driven circular packaging value chains. We recognize that the industrial and regulatory requirements for packaging information increase enormously, and this will have various impacts on the packaging data management of distributors. More information or more data will be required from the packaging. Not only the information on the product, so the content of a packaging, will be relevant, but also the packaging itself. The effort and complexity for the packaging stakeholders will increase in order to meet all the requirements. The guideline describes a data structure that supports two circular packaging use cases. So the first use case is the general increase in recyclate qualities through increased knowledge of the composition of packaging, and thus enabling more efficient and application-oriented recycling. Relevant packaging information about the recycling are, for example, like the ingredients of the packaging, so what kind of polymer types, aluminium, paper has been used, what kind of inks, adhesives has been used, is the packaging biodegradable or not, and what is the overall density of the packaging. These are all questions that are relevant for the recycling. And the second use case focuses on the tracking and the tracing of the recyclate proportion in plastics applications. This includes the knowledge of recycled content in the packaging, how much recycled content has been used in the packaging, as well as the origin of the recyclate. Is it a post-consumer or post-industrial recyclate? The usage of recyclate with different origin has an impact on the amount of tax fees. To develop this guideline, there was extensive collaboration from the outset. Initially, this started with a group of machine manufacturers from the various production and recycling processes. They recognized this 3 to 4 years ago in order to close the information gaps in cross-company data exchange for packaging. The companies joined forces to form the so-called R-Cycle community and recognized right from the start that the cross-company data exchange would only work with a common language. And that was the starting point. Together with R-Cycle, we developed a GS1 guideline for circular packaging based on open GS1 standards. So R-Cycle and the plastic packaging community were driven to create an interoperable and sustainable solution for packaging information through the increasing regulatory pressure on the market players. Among other regulations, the European Commission published in the end of November 2022 a draft regulation focusing on packaging, the so-called Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, or short PPWR, in order to reduce the negative environmental impact of packaging in the European Union. So the focus here is on the 3 R's: to reduce, to reuse, and to recycle. And in particular, from 2030, all plastic packaging must contain a certain proportion of recycled material from post-consumer sources. We are pleased to see that the Australian National Framework for Recycled Content Traceability and the focus on plastic packaging in Australia, it is clear that whether it's in Europe or Australia, traceability and providing confidence in the source of recyclate will become an increasingly important feature of the plastic sector. So let me tell you a little bit more about the process of developing this guideline. The guideline was developed from January 2022 till August 2023. So over 1.5 years, we collaborated on the development of the guideline. In order to define a solution-based approach, we followed the classic GS1 principle. After the call for participation for the committee project, the objectives and the scope for the guideline were defined with the project group. The aim was to enable the traceability of packaging information. So first, generating recycling relevant data of a packaging, and secondly, generating information on the recycled content of packaging and the recyclate origin. During the workshops with the community, we looked at the physical material flow of a packaging life cycle. So how is the packaging produced and what process steps are required, what happens with the packaging when it's disposed of, what happens during sorting and recycling. So the expertise and the input of the industry experts was important in order to describe and to define different process steps in the packaging value chain. So 15 relevant process steps were identified describing the whole plastic packaging life cycle. From this, we derived the relevant data attributes. So what packaging data is relevant for recycling and in which process steps do I receive this data? As well as the question, how high is the recyclate content in the packaging and which recyclate is relevant? Does it come from household waste? And thus, based on the recycling relevant process steps, in total 6 key supply chain events were identified to enable circular plastics traceability. For the sake of wide application basis, some process steps were subsumed under one event. The results were defined in the guideline, providing a helpful, structured approach on how to trace packaging information via GS1 standards. So one of the biggest challenges in the committee project was to ensure that packaging process steps can be mapped in a structured way. Experts from the plastic packaging industry know that the production of packaging can look very complex and consist of many different process steps. Some process steps are repeated, sequences can change in different companies. All of this must be considered in the approach and still be defined in a general way. It was also important that we all develop a common understanding of the relevant information and data attributes without losing the focus on the scope. According to the motto also, as little data as possible, as much as necessary in order to achieve the acceptance of the packaging industry, sharing packaging information without the transfer of know-how. The guideline was also presented and evaluated in other industry initiatives, with the result of a positive feedback. Another challenge stems from the necessary technical nature of the guideline, which means that clarification is required for different stakeholders in the value chain. For this reason, we offer webinars on the guideline from time to time and are available for discussions and questions. We as GS1 create the basis for standardization, but only through users and solution providers our standards come to life. It is great to see that the guideline is currently being used, implemented and disseminated by some plastic equipment manufacturers, with scope for the community to grow over time. Thanks to the open nature of the standards, different systems can interact with each other in the future, regardless of the number of solution providers and users. Our next step now is to raise the current national application recommendation to a global level and to make it accessible for all stakeholders beyond company and country boundaries, including Australia. The guideline, in its current form, helps to meet not only the industrial requirements for circular packaging, but also the regulatory requirements for the European PPWR, and also could potentially providing the starting point for the Australian plastic packaging sector to help implement the voluntary requirements in the Australian National Framework for Recycled Content Traceability using open global standards. In the end, we are all pursuing the same goal: to create a circular economy for packaging.